First off, as we always do, we'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we gather across the state, and we pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important roles that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples play on the land, sky and waterways used for outdoor activities. I'm in Brisbane, or Meanjin, on Yagara country, which is the traditional home of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. If you'd like to, you can put in the chat the place and the country that you're joining us from today. So please feel free to do that. We also acknowledge the funding that's provided by the Queensland Government to support outdoor activities across Queensland, and acknowledge the work that a lot of government departments and ministers do and have done in relation to outdoor activities, including the sport and recreation, who are within the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and they've been a power of work in the last 18 months as we talk about the recovery from the world of COVID and the response to that. So welcome to today's sessions of Coffee and Conversation. My name is Dom Courtney, Executive Officer of Outdoors Queensland. Our Operations Manager, Mark Squires, is my regular co-host, and Mark's with us again today. I'd like to welcome all members of Outdoors Queensland and any others who are joining us, including people from across Australia. So welcome. As I said before, the recordings are publicly available of these sessions. But we call it Coffee and Conversation for a reason. It's about a conversation with you and across the sector and with others as we go along. This is episode 18 of Coffee and Conversation for 2021. And we seem to have made it to September. So congratulations to all of you on making it to September. It's been another interesting journey, I think, is the overused reality TV slogan, the word that they use. A little bit of an agenda for today. And I've had a shocker because I forgot to update some things. So we do have Susanna Etty from Intrepid Travel joining us, as well as on top of these the topics there. So a little bit about the Outdoors Queensland Awards nominations. They closed last week, and the finalists will be announced next week, and winners will be announced at an online event on Friday the 29th of October, so last Friday in October. There'll be a lot more information coming out about registration for the awards evening, but when you see the finalists, I think you'll all agree that there's been some wonderful people doing some wonderful things in the outdoors, and we look forward to celebrating all of those finalists, and then of course the winners of the awards as well. But it is an important thing to note that all of the finalists have done some really wonderful things. I'm not a judge, but I could see, I observed the judging, I suppose, and the judges certainly had a difficult time with some of the decisions, which made it interesting, which is great to see. The other one there, that the face-to-face Active Queenslanders Industry Alliance forums, they concluded this week. Mark actually represented Outdoors Queensland at the final one on Monday, so thanks for doing that, Mark. There will be an online forum in the not too distant future as well, so check out the AQIA website for details on that one. A couple of other things we've got going on. Inside the outhouse, I think is Pete on this line? Yeah. Pete, did you want to mention the topic for next session? I think it's Monday the 19th of September.
Yeah, Dom, happy to. Morning, everyone. Pete Smith from Inside the Outhouse here. We don't have a session next week, but we've got a, I guess, end of term, the time that we've been in next Friday. We're having a bit of an outhouse social on Friday the 17th at the usual outhouse time of 13 minutes past 6. I'll put the details in the chat. And we just encourage you to come in, have a chat, connect with people who work in the outdoor sector, and just share stories and enjoy each other's company. Thanks very much. Thanks for all your
Pete.
support, and have a great day.
Thanks, mate. So yeah, Pete, if you can add that in the chat, that'd be great. Thanks, mate. So the review of the Queensland Stock Route Network, that closed for submissions, but our submissions on our website. We've talked about that the last few sessions. The other one I just wanted to mention, Murdoch Uni, they're running a research project on the effects of ticks, and they're seeking contributions from people who have been bitten by a tick within the last 72 hours. So they actually want you to literally give them the tick. It's quite interesting, their survey, and they're looking at getting, I think, some biopsies and stuff that they're looking for. So it's actually quite an interesting survey. They're looking at the medical ramifications of tick bites, but yeah, one of their things is they actually want the tick as well. So normally if I get bitten by a tick, the tick doesn't last long enough to hand it over to someone else, but that's just me. So yeah, I just wanted to flag that one, and Mark will probably share some information about that one, but yeah, certainly encourage people if you're interested in that one. Not that I'm encouraging to go out and get bitten so you can participate, but yeah, it's an interesting project. And the other one there is the COVID-19 business support grants. That's about still the lockdown impacted businesses in Queensland. And it's a joint Queensland and Australian government support package now. And they've actually expanded it to include non-employing sole traders. So previously it had to be businesses with a minimum payroll spend, but they've expanded it to include sole traders. So it's worth having a look at the eligibility on that one, yeah, if you get a chance. I just also want to flag Sport and Rec have got some funding coming up. So this is their active game day projects funding. So they're talking about field of play infrastructure projects, and that could include things like trials. So there's some information about it. There's a whole section about lighting for fields and stuff like that, but it also could be the spaces themselves where activities take place. So there's a significant amount of money on that one. There's several $1 million, I think, but it's for projects between $50,000 to $150,000 that the department will contribute there. But they're looking for co-contributions. But yeah, it's worth having a look at the eligibility and the guidelines on that one. So next up, I'd just like to hand over. In August, I participated in the Better Futures Forum, which was all about climate action, and we spoke about it a little bit here. And we had Damon from Outdoors People for Climate Action talk a while back about the forum. In the forum, I was on a panel which was organised by Outdoors People for Climate Action, which was focused on climate action for the outdoor and tourism industry. And Dr. Suzanne Etty spoke on the same panel. I haven't heard what Susanna was involved in. I invited her to come along and share more with us today. So quick introduction. Susanna is the Environmental Impact Specialist at Intrepid Travel. She leads Intrepid's climate action work, including carbon performance reporting and transitioning business to the low carbon economy, and is also a board member of Tourism Declares and a keen bushwalker. So I'll just stop my screen share and allow you to take over.
Well, thank you very much. Now we just get the technology going. There I am. Just give me a moment just to see that it's all working. So yes, yeah, you're hopefully seeing the main screen and not my notes.
Yep.
Yep. Working? Cool. Excellent. So yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm joining you today virtually from Naarm in Melbourne, and I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I would like also to pay my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this virtual meeting takes place today, and also pay my respect to elders both past and present. And as we share our knowledge, teaching and practices, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. So I work for the world's largest adventure travel company, and that has been a pioneer in sustainable travel for over 30 years. Intrepid has been a carbon neutral business since 2010 and became in 2018 the world's largest travel business to be actually B certified B Corp. And what that means is that we meet the highest standards of verified social and environmental performance, but also public transparency, legal accountability to balance profit and purpose. And other B Corps that you might know, including the outdoor venture brands like Kathmandu, Patagonia, or also Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And as you heard, I'm the environmental impact specialist based here in the headquarters, and I'm responsible for all our climate action work. And that's really around annual reporting of our greenhouse gas inventory, driving climate change performance, meaning emission reductions, the advocacy work like today, and working now with the business globally to transition to a low carbon economy. But what's important is that we actually haven't only recently become worried about climate change. In fact, the journey started in the company back in 2005 when a group of senior managers read The Weather Makers by Tim Flannery, which is about the history and future impacts of climate change. And that started the team thinking, and fast forward and also feedback from our stakeholders, which included our customers, we took actually definite action on climate and became the world's largest carbon neutral travel company in 2010. And since then, we have offset more than 358,000 tons of carbon emissions worldwide. And we're certainly seeing sort of, I think a lot was happening post the mega fires last year here in Australia, that we're seeing a lot more companies now committing to carbon neutrality. And that's certainly really great, but being carbon neutral is actually no longer enough. Based on the facts that we know today, and certainly with the IPCC report in August, we would be lying to ourselves if we just continue though by being carbon neutral is enough for the travel industry. Because really, over the last 15 years, the need for climate action has grown, more obvious year on year. And that's not only that the climate crisis really leading to more extreme weather events, and you're certainly seeing the effects to the Barrier Reef, the mega fires that we have experienced here. It threatens people and wildlife world over, but it's also a threat to the business because so many of the destinations that we really love may well be destroyed by drought, fires, or other weather events over the next decades. And that really led us in January 2020, so just before, 6 weeks before the pandemic was declared, to declare a climate emergency with Tourism Declares, which is a global collective of tourism businesses, organizations, and individuals who have pledged urgent action on climate change. And our climate emergency is underpinned by a 7-point commitment plan. But before I go into this, I actually would like to talk a bit more about Tourism Declares. So we are now a global community of 315 organizations, companies, and professionals. And that includes your tour operators, your accommodations, your destinations, for example. And we all plan for a better future for tourism. We are all committed to align our plans with the need to cut global emissions in half by 2030. But we are also sharing the challenges, the ideas, solutions as we look to develop tourism that is in balance with our climate, restore biodiversity, and support vulnerable people across the world. So what does it actually mean to declare? The important part, this is not just a stamp on your website, it's actually about action. But it's not done in isolation or that you have to do it all alone, because as I said, we are actually sharing, we're working very collaborative in this volunteer organization. First thing is to develop a climate action plan that is adopted by the executive board within 12 months of the initial declaration. It's about sharing your commitment publicly. It's about really cutting carbon emission and reducing and working together. And that's really important, is to encourage your suppliers and partners to make the same declaration. And the next slide, 2 slides, shows you actually how we have built momentum. As I mentioned, we joined in January 2020. We were one of the founding members. We now have 300 plus organizations. The numbers are growing. We have industry-wide representation from around the world. It's destination-led. We have an expert working group for destinations, and Visit Scotland and the Glasgow Convention Bureau are already members. But what is really fascinating also, how much representation and engagement we're having in the destination in Scotland. And that includes by now also restaurants, visitor extraction, and tour operators. Oops, nope, that was too many going forward. That was the one I wanted. So, and what are we planning forward? So we do recognize coming towards the Conference of Parties, COP26 in October, starting on the 31st October. We will be launching a Glasgow Declaration for a Decade of Climate Action. We are working on climate action blueprints for destination, tour operators and accommodation to help those key industries to create a climate action plan. I'm heavily involved in the tour operator one to share our experience methodology across around measurement and reduction. We're doing climate action workshops, and we are also working with key climate action certifications to align our criteria. So what does a climate action plan include? So this is what you're seeing here on the screen is actually our 7-point commitment plan. What's important is that we are continuing to measure our emissions, but we are also continuing to offset the unavoidable emission that we can't offset by investing in high profile offset projects that have additional socioeconomic or environmental benefits to the communities. And we do more than we have to do. It's about going 100% renewable across the globe in our offices. We have already Melbourne, then the UK, our Brixton office, and Toronto in Canada, but we want to have this in every single office by 2025. Committing to setting emission reduction targets based on science, to invest into green deposits, thereby supporting assets and projects consistent with delivering a low carbon economy, and that's what we have done here in Australia. It's also about empowering women and to ensuring sustainable growth. And last point is around research. And I'm really excited that actually in the last week, we announced a new partnership with the Blue Carbon Lab, which sits at the Deakin University here in Victoria. And that's a partnership where we will be financially and also with volunteer hours support a series of wetland rehabilitation projects here in Victoria to restore and protect blue carbon ecosystems. Business certainly has a vital role to drive greenhouse gas emissions and building the resilient zero emission economy we really urgently need. There's what needs to be done at government level, but also business has a vital role to play. But all of this really this action has to be grounded in science. And the tourism industry certainly has a front seat in this unfolding emergency, with the impacts being felt on the places and people that we visit. And that's why Intrepid has actually joined other companies to set a science-based emission reduction target and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions at the pace and scale that science says is necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 degree. And there weren't many highlights last year, but that was certainly our highlight, my personal one, that we actually last year became the first global tour operator with a verified science-based target. And that really shows companies like ours how much and how quickly the business needs to reduce their greenhouse gas emission to prevent the worst impacts of climate change, but also giving us a clear path towards decarbonization and keeping us accountable. So as I said, in a year with very few highlights, the approval of the science-based target by the Science-Based Target Initiative has certainly been our high point. But there was also a lot of focus last year on the advocacy work and what we implemented in 2020. And it was not really about the value these projects could create for Intrepid, but rather the value that we could create for the wider industry and in turn for the people, the places, but also the animals of the world. So last year, I authored a 10-step quick start guide to decarbonize your travel business. and to provide really a low barrier way for other travel companies to get started on the carbon journey. Because that's really where I see a lot of value, is like really enable, including you on the call, those that not yet measuring, is like, how do I get started, and can I get access to a low barrier document that gives me kind of the starting steps to how do I really understand how climate change is impacting our business, but how do I also develop a carbon management strategy? And the document has real world examples from Intrepid, really to show how others can implement similar strategies within their own organization. So in closing, I understand that there's all things still COVID-19 at the top of our minds now, but we mustn't lose of the broader sustainable issues, and that's in particular climate change. While the pandemic poses a huge threat to the viability of our industry, climate change poses an even long-term threat for us, and a much bigger one. And I find, if anything, the COVID-19 crisis is really highlighting how much more we could be doing to combat the climate crisis. It's proven what can be achieved when governments work together, find funding, and take action. And it's also shown us how much is possible if we have the will to change. And this guide actually is, just to remind, I probably haven't mentioned it, is free to download. It's accessible on our website, and here are also my contact details in case you would like to get in touch, but feel free also, if you are interested, to download the 10-step guide. And I just stop sharing. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Suzanne.
You're
Does anyone
welcome.
have any questions? I guess the part of this, I suppose, we have some tourism operators on the line, but also particularly accommodation operators from the school camp world,
Okay.
and others from I guess the community organisations. I just wondered if anyone has any questions, or maybe you can always contact Suzanne later on with the emails and those sort of things. So does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thanks, Mark, for sharing the link. That makes it easy.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. All right, I'll just go back to sharing my screen and get it moving along. Thank you very much for that. Just lost my screen, but there we are. Lovely. I just wanted to flag, as most people might be aware, yesterday, the 9th of September, was Are You OK Day? So I just wanted to have a quick discussion about that topic. The tagline of Are You OK is a conversation could change your life. And I think outdoors people are pretty good at helping others to change their lives for the better, whether that's, you know, taking a group on a bushwalk, whether it's part of a bushwalking club, or particularly a lot of the work that outdoor educators do, and adventure therapy world. But also we need to look after ourselves and after our colleagues. So the thing with Are You OK? It was Are You OK Day yesterday, but it's about having these important conversations with people around us every day, not just one day a year. So there's quite a few resources available on the Are You OK website to help. So those of us who might not be so natural at asking these important questions and having these conversations. And I just put on the screen there the sort of the 5-step, I guess, the headings that Are You OK put out there, you know, with the asking the question, listening, encouraging action, and overcoming possible denial. And maybe that's the one that's particularly relevant. And then and checking in. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that one as a, I guess, just a topic it's been out there this week a little bit. So yeah. So I hope you're all okay, and I hope you've had a chance to actually have those conversations with other people as we've gone along this week and anytime. All right. The wonderful world, I think Suzanne mentioned the COVID, that is an overwhelming topic, but yeah, I just wanted we'll go through some of the COVID protocols world and that sort of things. So the roadmap was updated a fortnight ago. I think it was actually during our session that we held a fortnight ago. They put out a new roadmap. So all of Queensland's been on the same level of restrictions. That's stage 3 of the roadmap that's in the maroon box there on the screen for the last couple of weeks. And it is worth just a reminder that new normal that's shown along the bottom of the roadmap, all of those controls continue to be in place. So we need to make sure we've got those things happening. And Mark's just shared a link to the roadmap there in the chat. Thank you, mate. The reminder, this hasn't changed. I just like to have it there as a bit of a flag that restricted businesses still need to follow COVID safe checklists. And that's as defined in the schedule of the public health direction. And then Queensland Health has specifically advised that when outdoor ed providers are providing indoor accommodation services, that's restricted business. So it is within the short-term accommodation category. So just wanted to flag those ones just in case there's any confusion on that, because there has been some discussions about the outdoor operations, which is this next slide. So if you're an outdoor only based organisation with no accommodation, that's an unrestricted business and you don't need to have to comply with the COVID safe checklist. But if you've got any indoor spaces associated with your outdoor operations, then you do need to have the checklist for that part of it. So it is a little bit confusing potentially. So just wanted to flag that. But there aren't, the COVID safe industry plans are out of the picture now. So as they have been for a little while now. Same, even though that direction was updated, I just wanted to flag those same exemptions are still in the current direction. So the one there about the occupant density for outdoor ed providers not applying to school-aged children from the same group, etc. So that hasn't changed, which is great to see. And the other one is about the Check in Queensland app. It's mandatory for restricted businesses, but there's a change there in relation to camps for school-aged children. So so that's included in the direction number 26 we're up to now, not 25. I didn't update that slide. So yeah. So other couple of things, the Education Queensland restrictions, that was updated, I think 3 weeks ago. But I think it's been updated again, but it didn't change anything about the school camps. So state schools can go on camps and excursions at Department of Ed facilities or non-Department of Ed facilities. But you need a COVID safe checklist for restricted businesses if it's a non-department facility, and that applies to school camp providers. It specifically says in there that camps and excursions are not permitted for state schools in scenario 3, which is the local government area or statewide lockdown, and scenario 4, which is the school closure, which I guess makes sense on that one. Just this week, the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance has released a report into COVID-19 in education settings in New South Wales during June and July this year. So it's actually quite an interesting report. Laurie mentioned it during the Outdoors New South Wales session today. And there's some key findings that I haven't read the report there, but I had a look at the media release. There were 51 educational settings that they looked at in New South Wales, and there were 19 schools and 32 early childhood services. And there were 59 individuals, which is 34 students and 25 staff with COVID-19 who attended those educational settings while infectious. And they found that most of the children in the study had no or mild symptoms for COVID-19, and 2% across the state required hospitalisation. The transmission rate, they said, from primary cases to close contacts was 4.7%. And then they said virus transmission occurred in 19 of the 51 educational settings. So there's the big thing that they talked about in it was about transmission rates occurring in early childhood services between staff members and from staff member to children. And I think it was I've got it here somewhere, 16.9% transmission between staff members, and they said from staff member to children was 8% or 8.1%. So they said that the early childhood centres were fully open with high attendance rates during the period, and many staff were not yet age eligible for vaccination. So, and then a lot of those affected services were in the local government areas with the highest community incident rates of COVID-19 in Sydney. But the other one that they said there was transmission was low in schools. There was 9 secondary cases in 728 close contacts, so 1.2% it said. But it did say there was a school holiday period and then limited on-site attendance in term 3 because most of Greater Sydney was under stay-at-home orders and students were doing the remote learning. And they talked about students, staff and children who caught COVID at a school or early childhood service, passing it on to their household members. But the one that sort of scared me a little bit was and we've heard this in the media a lot, but this report re-emphasises it, about the rate of transmission of the Delta variant in schools and early childhood services and in households was about 5 times higher than seen in educational settings and households in their study in 2020, which was about the original strain of COVID-19 virus. So it does say that it's encouraging to have this study done on the current outbreak, but there's still some figures in there that are quite concerning. So yeah, it's worth a look if you're interested in some of those stats and the research. It's definitely worth having a look, or just have a look at the media statement like I have at the moment. So yeah, it is worth a look. There's some information in there that I think is quite relevant to that we can learn from the New South Wales experience particularly. I don't know if anyone has any comments, or I'm probably rattling along a little bit. If anyone wants to speak about any of that stuff, you probably haven't had a chance to look at it yet yourself, but yeah, if you're interested in that, please have a look at it. Other big topic that I wanted to have a chat about today is COVID-19 vaccinations. And I think this is going to be a topic of interest for a lot of, particularly businesses. So the federal government's position is that COVID-19 vaccinations are voluntary, but governments and some businesses, including I think Qantas, a few others, have announced mandatory vaccinations for workers. So the Commonwealth Government has mandated vaccination for residential aged care workers from next week. And then New South Wales Government's also announced teachers are required to vaccinate to return to face-to-face teaching. So I guess the big question there is about, as I said on the screen there, is there likely to be a similar mandate for workers in outdoor organisations, including school camps? There's been a few articles written on this and a few varying opinions about how it might work and what are the legal implications. It's really a bit of a tricky area, but I think people are going to really have to come to grips with it. So I just wanted to really open it up. If anyone has any discussions about how different people are looking at dealing with this area, more than happy to just open the floor up if anyone wants to comment on it.
Hello, it's Tanya from Camp Kubi. How are you?
Hey Tanya, good, thanks. How are you going?
Good, thanks. Thanks for raising this agenda item. I guess the reason why I was interested in this is because I have heard, but just unofficial chatter, that although schools might not be mandated here in Queensland, there might be an expectation for the centres, a bit like that little checklist or the documents that it'll be preferable. It won't be mandatory, but it'll be preferable to access a centre with staff who have vaccines. And I was just interested if anyone else had heard that gossip or whether it was just in my little sphere.
I haven't heard it yet, but I'd certainly be interested if anyone else has. I mean, I guess that's going to be an interesting bit. There are, at the moment, like I said before, the Education Department has different rules depending on Department of Education centres or external centres where the COVID safe checklist applies, but in Queensland, that's for state schools, but I'm not sure if there's others, if anyone else has heard similar stories on that one. No?
No, okay, so it's just more about just sit and I guess watch what's going to happen in our area.
Yeah.
Not that I'm suggesting mandatory vaccination for our staff at all. If anything, I was just thinking as an employer, oh, how would we go about that unless it's something that's required by government?
Yeah, well, that actually brings me to the next slide, Tanya, which the Fair Work Ombudsman has actually put out some quite comprehensive guidance on managing vaccinations in general in the workplace, but they're obviously focused on the COVID-19 vaccination. And they've got this analysis of when it might be lawful and reasonable to require employees to be vaccinated, but then also how to respond if employees refuse to be vaccinated, like what is the right thing to do. So I've had a little look at that. They say that if there's a specific law, like a state or territory public health order requiring an employee to be vaccinated, then you can do it. There's a few reasons. Another one is if it's permitted by an enterprise agreement or the employment contract, or if it would be lawful and reasonable for the employer to give their employees a direction to be vaccinated, and that's a case-by-case basis. And then there's a whole section on what is lawful and reasonable directions to get vaccinated. But then there's also stuff like anti-discrimination laws that they talk about in there. So it's pretty complicated, I think. They do say on their webpage they recommend people seek legal advice if you're even considering making vaccinations mandatory in your workplace. And I think that's pretty good advice as far as some of this stuff's pretty complicated. It talks also about complying with workplace health and safety, obligations under workplace health and safety law. And there's some more information on that on the Safe Work Australia webpage that they've got links to in that, the one Mark just shared. In there, there's links to quite a lot of this stuff that's in there. I think it's worth having a look at, but I would highly recommend, I think, they're not trying to just step away from this, but I think it's a matter of, if you're looking at it, then it probably is something that is worth getting legal advice on, rather than just going off, the media articles that seem to be cropping up about this topic. But yeah, it looks like, particularly in New South Wales, where they're talking about it for teachers down there, so the New South Wales government, it looks like that's going to happen in the school camp area as well. Obviously, if the teachers have to be vaccinated, I think there's going to be an expectation on the camps as well. Not sure about other areas on that one yet. I haven't heard what's happening in Victoria, but it's certainly something that I think is happening. Does anyone have any comments on the vaccination question? And it is a difficult question, I think.
Yeah, I'll just say I think there seems to be a tendency to try and shove some of this back on the employer. And yeah, I think it ends up being luck of the draw as to how many staff you might have that are vaccine hesitant and how strident they are. Seems like New South Wales are going to attempt to hold a gun to people's heads. In terms of, if you don't have a vaccine passport, you're under the same lockdown restrictions you're under at the moment. And seems to be a very strong suggestion that you can't work in anything that has public contact without vaccination. But we'll see how that works out for them, I think.
Yeah, and I think on that Fair Work Ombudsman website, I had a look at that, and there was a section there dealing with the public contact aspect as well of work. So but it's that they sort of go a little bit further than that, and they talk also about within the workplace there's an obligation for all your workers, and that's an interesting one as well. So yeah, it's pretty complicated, but I agree that it could be it is hard for each individual employer to manage it, I think.
Well, there's industrial manslaughter legislation that's come in recently too. So if one of your employees were to get COVID and die from it, and it can be shown that they received that in the workplace, you could be up for industrial manslaughter.
Yeah. Gavin, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just reminded me about a couple of our clubs have asked Bushwalking Queensland about mandatory vaccination, because some of the members are indicating that if there's no mandatory vaccinations in the club, they're going to start leaving the clubs.
Yeah, right. So that comes back to what your members / clients are expecting as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that's a tough one as well. And as far as how do you manage that? And it's a little bit different in a club situation, I guess, where you can have a mandate because it's not a workplace, it's not affecting someone's ability to have their livelihood, but gee, it could drive a wedge between members in the clubs too.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, I think, and that's why I guess we wanted to put some time aside to talk about this today, because I think it's going to have impacts for clubs, for workplaces, but also potentially just for gatherings. Like Andrew mentioned, the stuff in New South Wales about having the vaccine passport, which is almost like how it's going to work. And I did see, and I haven't got details on this, but I saw something about the Checking Queensland app is going to have the ability to have your vaccine status included on that. I don't know what that means if you scan to check into a venue, it comes up and somehow they know whether you're vaccinated. I don't know how that's going to work, but I heard the health minister talking about that as an added feature of the Checking Queensland app, and obviously that's being used so widely across the state that maybe that's the next step in that space as well, of trying to include vaccination status when you're checking into places. I don't know how that would work. Yeah, has anyone got any details on that one or heard any more on that? No, I don't think I imagined it, but Adrian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Dom, just with I'm just wondering about the scenario that you're saying with if New South Wales does move to requiring camp providers to be vaccinated. So for venues that are actually positioned on the border and are actually receiving New South Wales education clients, I'm just wondering what the impact will be to them. And and as Andrew was saying, it's like it puts that employer in a pretty difficult situation where you can't mandate that their staff actually get the vaccination, but then you've got your clients actually saying, well, we can't attend if you haven't got a full vaccinated team. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess that the question's going to be too that, like I said, there's also, and I haven't gone into it in detail, but there is anti-discrimination laws that apply. So I guess it's a bit of a thorny one, I think, and I think it's something that's going to need a lot more discussion and a lot more consideration. I don't know that, I don't know whether it's going to come to a direction from the Queensland government on this or how it's going to work, but I know that the Fair Work Ombudsman are well and truly onto this as far as trying to give some guidance on it. But I think even there, some of what they're saying is, very carefully consider this sort of stuff when you're talking about the workplace conditions that you've got.
If there's a situation where they get to the 80% of people with the double vaccination and things open up, I think then a school or a client that insists on 100% vaccine rate of a centre is actually out of step with, what the societal kind of norm is. So, it's going to, I think most employers would say it's going to be impossible to provide 100% coverage short of having to stand people down and dismiss them.
Yeah, and no one wants that. Realistically,
no one wants that.
Right now, we need as many highly skilled and experienced people working in the outdoors to keep our programs safe. The volunteers who are out there, particularly in the clubs, who are leading, groups and making sure people are getting the most out of these programs. That's exactly what we need right now. We don't need fewer people in our industry. We need more. So I think if someone had a personal choice of not wanting the vaccination. It could be for medical reasons. It could be various reasons that someone has that position. But it's a really difficult one. And I think you make a good point, Andrew, of, well, if the overall percentage is 80%, that seems to be some sort of trigger. I think some people are suggesting it should be higher than that, but that's, again, different experts have different opinions. But I'd love to see, that make sure everyone's protected from this disease. But I guess the big question there is, what is acceptable? Is it okay to have, 90%, 80% of staff are vaccinated, or how much control is the client going to have on that as far as the operations? And it's a bit like having your safety management system dictated to you by your client, and that does happen sometimes. But this is actually a safety measurement or safety measure that each organisation needs to consider, I guess, and that's whether you're a business or a non-profit organisation.
I think Barry Chicklin came out yesterday and said, I don't want the vaccinated and the unvaccinated mingling. That to me starts to sound like apartheid. It's
certainly two speeds, isn't it? They used to talk about two-speed economy. It's an interesting measure, that one. Any other comments on this one? Like, I deliberately set aside a bit of time today because I think it might need further discussion in a couple of weeks, that we maybe spend some a bit of time on it, and maybe even get someone in to speak about it who knows a bit more about it than I do. But who knows how much is going to change in the next couple of weeks. But just wonder if anyone else wants to comment on that, or if you think it's worthwhile to spend a bit more time on the idea of what vaccination might be required, or what this is likely to look like. Not sure if that's a yes, we should spend more time on it, or it's just too confusing. I'm not sure.
I've probably said enough. I think we will have to look at this, and I think having an industry approach will be a lot better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too, Don.
Yeah, same. I think it's just something that we just have to keep an eye on what's going on, and and go through it appropriately. I mean, I sort of feel that it's one of those things that what we really need to be doing is just constantly telling all our employees that they should be getting vaccinated as a first step. Like, I constantly tell my guys when I talk to them about making sure that they get vaccinated, because we could end up in a situation where we do need to be vaccinated. Or, I sort of put it in terms of, well, if you guys go to work down south, New South Wales, there'll be definitely situations in New South Wales where you'll have to be vaccinated. So you need to weigh that up now as to how you want that to work.
Yeah. And to be double vaccinated, you need time in between injections. If you get Pfizer, it's 3 weeks, but if you get AstraZeneca, it's longer. So
yeah,
that's a long time to go with one vaccination if there's an outbreak, but also it's a long time if you can't work unless you've got 2 vaccinations. And I'm not saying that's the situation right now, but if it becomes a situation, it could be 3 months between the first and second, and you've got to get that first one as well. So I think the key bit is probably that encouraging people to be vaccinated, and that's also about protecting them personally, but protecting the rest of the workplace, but also, and our communities. But also, I guess, you can't get your second one. You can't be double vaccinated if you don't ever get the first one. So that's obviously the first step there.
Yeah.
Any other comments on the thorny issue of vaccinations, Gavin?
Yeah, I just just thought about other countries now thinking about having to get a booster, so you've got to add that into the whole layer of things as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're starting, I think there's boosters happening in the US already. I guess they were vaccinated a bit before us, so maybe that's starting to happen. Yeah, I've actually got a friend in the UK who has had both vaccinations. She's actually she's a nurse working in vaccinations, and she's recently caught COVID. So she had both vaccinations, but probably about 6 months ago. She's not terribly ill, thankfully, but she's lost all sense of smell and taste and other things and feeling pretty crook. So, that it is happening in other countries. I guess, again, we sort of, particularly in Queensland, thank our lucky stars that we are so fortunate, but I think it's something we need to certainly keep an eye on and try to understand that context. All right. I think we'll can certainly pencil that in for further discussion in other sessions, and we'll also have a look at what other resources we might be able to share and obtain to be better informed on it. Just in relation to what we're doing for the outdoors, I sort of had this one up a couple of times. A key thing I really want to, I guess I possibly don't say it loud enough, is if you're having any issues, if there's something you think we aren't aware of, please let us know. Please tell us about issues. You can contact the Sport and Rec COVID hotline, but more than happy for you to contact us directly and let us know about different issues. I just saw in the comment that looks like an issue right there that Andrew's just said. 1,100 students at a school sent home this morning with a 13-year-old student positive. So that's obviously hit the news, has it, Andrew?
Yeah, that was in the press conference. It was just like that. It had only just come to hand. That's why the press conference was late. So yeah, all those students have been asked to isolate until further notice. I mean, it's fairly close to Garden City Shopping Centre, so that's obviously been put up on contact tracing recently. So
yeah, because there was a truck driver that had been to the Garden City at Mount Gravatt Shopping Centre just on the weekend, I think. That's obviously very concerning. Wow. Good luck, I guess. And the other one, we should probably, I probably haven't said it a lot. Those people, like when people are in home quarantine because of possible contact, it's quite amazing what some of the people have done, even in the outbreak we had in August, the impacts that has on families and so many people across the community. It really is quite amazing. And I know that they throw the word hero out there a lot, but I think it is fairly heroic to be sitting there in home quarantine while everyone else is going about their business. So thank you for flagging that one. And I guess we can only hope that there's very little or no transmission within the school. I've said on there, we are speaking to interstate colleagues to understand more. We had Laurie join us last fortnight to talk about what's happening in New South Wales, and I hope you got something out of that, the picture there, and they've got a raid back release since then about what their how their restrictions are going to come in as they come out of lockdown in different areas. But it's good to sort of keep an eye on that and an ear on how things are going down there, and also provide them with some support too where we can. We're also working with Queensland Health through Sport and Rec particularly to talk about key issues and trying to find solutions to those issues, and other departments like education, making sure that our world is considered when there's decisions being made. And also doing a little bit with media as well. So I actually did an interview this Monday morning just gone about the value of school camps. I did one on camping a couple of weeks earlier. That's about ensuring that outdoor activities actually are, valued by the public, but also by the decision makers that we have out there. And it was an interesting discussion on Monday about people reflecting on their memories of school camps, which weren't all positive, but they certainly did. I sort of brought it back to development of resilience and communication skills and some of those things. But there was a little bit of callback from people who might not have been to a school camp for quite a while. So there was maybe some old school comments, I think, about school camps, which I tried to manage as much as I could. Just a few reminders there. As I said, that stock group one's closed. The forums have done for the AQIA, but yeah, we we had those, there's an online session coming up. And the awards, so it's really about the finalists and also the presentations. So yeah, and obviously next session isn't 30th of August for the Inside the Outhouse. As Pete said, it's next Friday with a social session for the Outhouse. But yeah, that just about wraps us up for today. I just saw Mark shared the link to the St Thomas More School story. And Andrew, yeah, that the regional Victoria about where sites, camps are open, but the schools in the lockdown areas can't get there. It's an ongoing issue, and the same thing potentially will happen, I think, in New South Wales with some of their areas coming out of lockdown and others still being in lockdown. So it is going to be an issue, I think, as we go further. It's pretty tough. Our next session for this one will be in a couple of weeks on the 27th of September. Don't forget that we've got heaps of resources on our website. Hopefully they're useful for all of you. But yeah, we'll might sign off now. Just wanted to remember the Are You OK Day messages, but also look after yourself and look after other people. And going back to Susanna's comment as well, look after our planet. So I'd really like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a great week ahead, and hope to see you soon.